No one expected that a nurse who has worked for many years in a hospice, an institution where those who have nothing left to help live out their last days on Earth, would make a shocking statement that would stir up the public. She said the following: "Despite the fact that even in the modern world the topic of posthumous existence is still avoided, I want to tell you about the incredible things that I have seen personally. I do this so that those who have lost their close relatives and beloved friends can make sure that they have not died, but continue to live in the spiritual sphere. Due to my professional duties, I have witnessed hundreds of deaths, and I have had the opportunity to observe what really happens to a dying person in his last moments of life. I can state with all responsibility that in these moments filled with the greatest mystery, some kind of veil is lifted in front of him, separating the other world from our mortal existence, and he sees what is inaccessible to us, the living. Besides, what he sees there calms him down most of the time. Some believe in the afterlife, and some do not. For me, there is no such question, because I do not need to believe in life after death. I know for sure that it exists." The name of the nurse who made this statement is Julie McFadden. She often had to deal with unusual cases in her work in the intensive care unit of the hospice. She honestly admitted that she had seen supernatural phenomena associated with the process of human death more than once. The most unusual and impressive case occurred with one patient who was not yet 30 years old, but he was diagnosed with an incurable disease. Because of this, he spent the last 6 months of his life in a hospice. The man was a difficult patient. It was hard for him to accept the idea that he would have to part with the benefits that he had earned through hard work. In the hospice, this young man was rarely visited by friends, and even less often by relatives. Seeing that loneliness oppressed him, Julie McFadden often talked to him, and soon he began to consider her his friend. He shared with her his innermost feelings that bothered him, and the main one, of course, was the fear of death. The young man often asked the question of what exactly the dying are going through, and what really awaits them in the next world. It so happened that on the day this patient died, Julie was not at the hospice, but some strange premonition pricked her heart as she was driving in the car on her personal business. This unusual sensation immediately made her think of the young man, and at that moment she seemed to hear his voice. "Oh, if I only knew that death happens this way, I would not be afraid of her coming." The woman looked around and made sure that there was no one else in the car, and immediately her phone rang. The nurse on duty reported that the young man had died. Then Julie realized that, leaving our mortal world, that young man, in gratitude for her care, gave her this important message. Julie admitted that she was extremely impressed by that case, and despite this, she did not dare to talk about it for several more years, so as not to be considered crazy and lose the right to work in the medical field. But it was that message from the otherworldly space that not only made her believe in the existence of an afterlife, but also became the reason that since then she began to observe the dying more closely in order to understand what really happens at the moment when people leave the mortal world. As a result, Julie identified signs indicating that a person is close to death, and all of them were directly related to what happens at the moment a person leaves the edge of physical life. She called these signs deathbed phenomena. Those who are about to pass on to another world often become sentimental and want all their friends and family members to be there at this moment. She also noted that dogs feel the impending death of a person, especially acutely. When their master is about to die, they begin to worry and try to show him their care without leaving the dying person for a minute. About other signs, Julie said the following: "Of particular interest are those that made even her believe that there would be some kind of continuation after death. Thanks to these signs, she gained confidence that a better life awaits us beyond the boundaries of our material world. Now she thinks that when we die, we just wake up in a place that we always knew about, but somehow forgot about." Julie also noted that in the last days of life, dying people often behave the same way and say about the same words. According to her observations, shortly before death, people begin to be in a state of extreme clarity. That is, they begin to perceive the world excessively sharply, and experience an unprecedented surge of energy. Moreover, this is often typical even for severe patients. That's what she said about it. Amazing things happen to many people before they die. They get a good appetite. Some of them get out of bed, start walking, talking, and laughing. However, the surge of this energy does not last long. Unfortunately, many patients die within a few hours or days after that. Therefore, I try to tell their family about this so that the sudden death of a loved one, after several days of feeling well, does not devastate them. Julia McFadden called visions the next sign of imminent death. They often occur a few weeks before death. People can, as usual, have a casual conversation with living relatives, but at the same time see someone from the deceased standing next to them or in some corner of the room. Usually such visions calm the dying person, and the best thing to do in this situation is simply to support your relative or friend on his deathbed. However, you need to understand that when people start having such visions, they are about a month away from death. 2 more signs of approaching death, according to Julie McFadden's observations, are a deadly look and a deadly gesture. That's what she called them. A death gesture is when a dying person, lying or sitting in bed, begins to pull his hands up as if he wants to hug someone. A hospice nurse described one of these cases. One of her patients sat up on the bed and stretched her arms up. She asked her what she was doing, and the patient replied that she was opening doors to heaven. As for the so-called death stare, it usually looks like this. A person stares intently into some corner of the room, as if he sees something very important for himself there. As a rule, someone from previously deceased relatives or even an angel. But if you click your finger in front of his face or say his name to somehow bring him out of this state, he still won't look away. But perhaps the most striking fact that precedes passing away is that people often accurately predict the time of their death. Julia McFadden has witnessed many times when people just talked, "I'm gonna die tonight. I know it, I feel it." And that's what happened in the end. Some people wait for their whole family and friends to gather in order to die. Other patients, on the contrary, wait for the moment when their loved ones leave the room, and only then they leave our world. There are also those who want to live up to some important event, for example, a birthday or a wedding. Julia McFadden said, "Perhaps the observations that I have collected will help people to be less afraid of death. The more I interacted with dying people, the less I began to fear the end of my mortal existence. I have seen with my own eyes many times various supernatural things that happened at the moment of a person's death, and almost always they give us hope that beyond the line of life, there is an amazing world where we are likely to meet again with those we love, and this time without any restrictions." Another doctor named David Kessler, who also worked for many years in a hospice, once said, "If there is nothing outside our world, then why do dying people say the opposite? What's the point of lying in the last moments of your life? Why mislead ordinary people? On the contrary, it is logical to assume that just at the moment of death they will tell the truth and nothing but the truth." David Kessler collaborated with the world-famous psychologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who devoted her life to caring for the dying, as well as studying near-death experiences. After her death, he published a book that included dozens of visions and sayings of dying people that she had personally heard, including David Kessler himself. He was 32 years old when he became interested in working in the field of nursing dying patients and began to conduct research in this area. Here is how he himself spoke about that time. "My first experience of information on my deathbed was with a woman named Dora. She courageously struggled with her incurable illness, but in the last weeks of her life, she began to lose consciousness and then come back to it. The first time it happened, she blacked out for a while, but then suddenly regained consciousness and started talking to someone no one else could see. From that day on, the woman increasingly began to look through her visitors and the doctors caring for her, as if looking through them. She was having a conversation with her invisible guest. When Dora's illness reached its critical point, she began to talk with her dead mother, and none of those present had any doubt that the woman had really seen her mother, because her voice was sincere and gentle. According to Dora, Her mother's clothes consisted of bright light, which was so intense that it was painful to look at it. David Kessler also added, "I am not a religious person, but this vision does not seem impossible to me. It seems to be a natural development of events at the end of human life. Our parents are waiting for us on the other side to facilitate our transition to another plane of existence and show us the way forward." In his study, David Kessler cited such a case. One woman was dying of heart failure, and one day the doctor noticed that she started talking to someone who was clearly not there. It was her previously deceased husband. The relatives decided that she was hallucinating because of the drugs. They asked the doctor to cancel these drugs, but even after that, the woman continued to talk to her late husband, easily alternating between talking with him and communicating with living relatives. David Kessler complained that most doctors do not discuss such things publicly and never openly admit them for fear of being considered insane. Therefore, they write off all the visions as side effects of drugs or just hallucinations. But in his opinion, the afterlife really exists. He was saying, "I have been watching the dying in hospice for many years, and I want to share one more observation. I have never heard a dying person say, 'Nothing is happening. I see nothing. I am entering into nothing.' If there is nothing beyond the boundaries of our world, then why do dying people say the opposite? And if that's the case, then I'd rather believe the words of the dying than the doubts of the living, who have never had to work with those who died in hospices. That is where people have nothing left to lose. And there's no need to lie." Another nurse who worked at the hospice and shared unique information with the world was Barbara Carnes. Observing dying people, she compiled a unique reference book in which she carefully and in detail described the behavior of patients at those moments when they left our mortal world. That's what Barbara said about it. "Death equalizes everyone. Among my patients, there were both ordinary workers and people who held a high position in society. But when a person dies, his social status loses its importance. Everyone, regardless of their position, is afraid of the unknown. And this fear is especially intensified in cases where the dying person has already witnessed how his loved one left this life hard. However, according to my observations, in more than half of my patients, this fear disappears shortly before death," Barbara added. She also noted that a few weeks before death, a person often sees those who died before him. Over the decades of her work, Barbara has collected hundreds of such stories, and they left her in no doubt that previously deceased loved ones come to a person in his last days on Earth to help him make the transition from the physical world to the otherworldly space. According to Barbara's observations, most often the figure acting as a guide to another existence is the mother of the dying person. And this is not accidental, because if a normal relationship has developed between a child and his mother, then there is no more important person for him. After all, this has its own logic. A mother brought her child into this world, and she will also transfer him to the metaphysical spheres of the universe. So, one of Barbara's patients was dying of cancer. The last night of her life, she was very restless and fell asleep only in the morning. And at dawn, she opened her eyes, looked carefully at the part of the room where no one was, and then smiled warily and whispered, "Mom, I'm so glad to see you." Shortly after that, the patient left our earthly world. Barbara also told another example, where her own father acted as a guide to the next world for a woman. That's how she talked about it. "There was a 52-year-old woman among my patients. She was very afraid of the thought of death, and she often told me that she would fight for her life until the last minute. 2 days before she left, she kept sitting up and looking through me, exchanging short remarks with someone. I asked the patient who she was seeing, and she replied that her dead father was talking to her. Shortly before her death, this woman said, 'It's okay, I'm not scared.'" At the conclusion of this story, Barbara added, "I can't explain these cases, but I witnessed them, so I believe in it. Understand, it's one thing to read about such a thing, and another to personally be present at the moment of death and feel the touch of otherworldly space with every particle of your being." About all similar cases, Barbara wrote the following. "There are 3 theories as to how and why such events occur. First, it is a bodily theory. According to her, Such visions are caused by a lack of oxygen and the release of various chemicals in the body. Secondly, it is a psychological theory according to which visions of deceased relatives are a psychological defense of the mind from death, since it is difficult for it to accept the idea that it will soon be gone. But there is a third, spiritual theory. She connects these supernatural experiences with the presence of a human soul and the reality of the afterlife. Barbara also noted that a few weeks before death, a person loses interest in our world because it is no longer the meaning of his existence. As we approach death, the veil separating our physical sphere from another space becomes thinner, and the dying person begins to feel that he is in two worlds at the same time. Perhaps that is why people see those who are dear to them and who died before them. In addition to meeting with deceased relatives, patients often told Barbara about visions of lights and places of incredible beauty. So one of the hospice patients, who was getting weaker every day, sat up in her bed one day, looked up and asked, "Do you see these lights? They want me to go." The woman died a few minutes later. According to Barbara Carnes, bright lights are a hallmark of many near-death experiences. She believed that they were either spiritual beings or some amazing phenomenon of the spiritual world, or maybe something that we, living people, are not yet able to comprehend. Another patient said that she hears the beautiful singing of the choir and feels the touch of the wings of angels. When she talked about it, a serene smile appeared on her face. Another patient turned to Barbara one afternoon as she entered his room and said, "It's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you for taking care of me. But now I'm going home. It's so beautiful. There are lights and clouds everywhere." On the same day this man left our world, Barbara Carnes said, "When patients see something like this, it always gives them hope. And at this time I understand that a person is living out his last hours on earth. I believe that the transition of such people to another world is easy and with minimal fear. All these visions and stories strengthen my belief that there's something more than our usual material world. At least it gives me hope that when my time comes to leave, someone who is dear to me will also come to me to help me make this important transition into the otherworldly space." Agree. Death is scary enough without that, so it would be quite nice if someone met us with tenderness and love. Dear friends, thank you for watching my video to the end. If you liked it, please like it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's very important. Thank you, and have a nice day.